Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 927. My opponent with the white pieces started off with e4. I went e5. I went knight f3, attacking my e-pawn. I defend it with knight c6, all very standard. And he plays bishop c4. You can see that's the second choice here, bishop b5, the old Ruy Lopez. Used to be the most popular move at the top levels. Nowadays I think bishop c4 is more popular. There's also d4, the Scotch game, which we will come back to because the move d4 was played in the game, although a little bit later. But he started with bishop c4, so this is an Italian game. I go bishop c5. I think that's the safest response. You can play knight f6, but I always kind of preferred to have white playing against the two knights defense. But if you become a specialist, you can learn to handle that position. But anyway, I went with bishop c5, just develop. And now he castled. There's lots of choices that white has here, of course. The main line is c3, to be followed with d3 typically in the modern play. c3 followed by d5 is the old classical main line of the Italian game. b4 is the Evans Gambit. And d3 just immediately. d3 is a quiet game, similar to the way that the grandmasters play it these days as well. Or you can castle here. This is fine. And it's not yet a gambit, although the castling right away often introduces gambit ideas because knight f6 attacks his pawn, and white can choose not to develop it. White can play, not to defend it. White can play a move like c3, for example, as a gambit, or he can defend it with the rook or the pawn with d3. Or, as in the game, he can play d4 and gambit the pawn that way. Let's back up. I wanted to mention, instead of castling, d4 is also a move in this position. I think I've seen it here more often than after castling. I think maybe it's a little more flexible to play it here. Black has the same three basic choices. He can take it with the pawn, with the knight, or with the bishop. And they all have their pros and cons. Taking with the knight, let's look at this one first. I always thought this was kind of dangerous because the knight can take this pawn. So you don't get a pawn out of this gambit if you play it that way. You give the pawn back immediately, but you get some active pieces. In this particular case, you might have to play something like d5 to deal with the pressure here on f7, but then you can chase that knight away, maybe gain a tempo. Anyway, that's a line that seems to be playable, but I always thought it was safest just to take with the bishop because the bishop grabs the pawn and also defends this pawn. But before we get to that, I should mention you can take with the pawn here, and then this just transposes into a line of the Scotch Gambit. So that's always something you can consider, especially if you're familiar with playing against the Scotch Gambit and you play this line already. Then you can just transpose into it. But if you don't have any prior knowledge of the Scotch Gambit or those knight takes e5 lines, I think bishop takes d4, and knight takes d4, So if you don't have any prior knowledge of that knight takes d4 line or the Scotch Gambit, then I recommend taking with the bishop. And it's one of the top choices of the chess engine. It leaves black with some slight edge. I was kind of saying it's not a good gambit, but it actually is a decent gambit. White has a lot of compensation for the pawn, so you can't treat it too lightly. But as with so many gambits, the compensation is not really quite enough. So with good play, black should be slightly better from this position. Anyway, let's go back to the game. I just wanted to mention he could play it there and to show those three ideas. He castled, and I played knight f6. And then he went d4, and then I chose to take with the bishop for the same reasons as before. He took, and I took. And in the previous line, if he had played it the move before castling, in this position, he probably would have castled, and I probably would have played knight f6, so could very well have transposed into the same position. And now it seems that the book line goes for the immediate f4, but he threw in bishop g5, which I thought was pretty interesting. And it's not a mistake. It's the opening book gave it a question mark, but I looked at it with a chess engine, and this is okay as well. Just putting a little pressure on this knight before opening up the f-file. It gets pretty logical. And I looked at white's play with the chess engine. You know, aside from deciding to play a gambit, he hasn't really done anything wrong. He's playing the gambit correctly as far as that goes. And to show you some of the dangers that black could get into, suppose black kicks the bishop here with h6. This is a pretty natural move, and I think h6 is still a fine move. And so he goes bishop h4. It's the follow-up here. Suppose you say, aha, I can grab another pawn, and you play the move g5. Then white can suddenly turn the tables with the very surprising move f4. So if you're thinking about playing this gambit, this is definitely something you should keep in mind. So what are the ideas here? Well, first of all, if you take the bishop, white can take the pawn, and all of a sudden you've got two pieces hanging. The knight is attacking this, the pawn is attacking this knight, and the queen is attacking this knight, which is not defended. So you can't actually hold on to both pieces. So you have to give the piece back, and your king side is now a wreck, and white is well developed. So white is better in that line. So what else could you try after f4? Say you want to hold on to the pawn. Just you want to hold on to the knight, so take a pawn instead of taking the bishop. He has the move rook takes f4 here. And this you might not have expected, but after you take, white gets a piece back, and you didn't get the bishop, so he got a piece for the rook. Plus he has this pin on the knight, and things are going to get very tricky. He's much better in this line. He's just down the exchange, and if he wins the piece, he's actually going to be up material. And once again, he's got good development. So what else could we try? g5, f4. We looked at pawn takes bishop, pawn takes pawn. You do pawn takes pawn the other way. This kind of transposes. The queen will grab the knight. You need to grab the bishop. And once again, he's got active pieces, and you have a wrecked king side, and he hasn't even sacrificed a piece here, although he might be down a pawn or two. But white is better in those lines. So the best line here actually is d5. And let's see, pawn takes, and then you grab the bishop. Then he grabs here on e5, and then you can move this knight away, grabbing this pawn back, and the queen takes. And white is still slightly better in this position. So it's gone from a position where black was better to a position where white was better, just like that. Let's count the pawns. 3 versus 3. Yeah, actually, it's even material, and white is more active and has this interesting pawn here, and black's king side is a wreck. So yeah, I'd much rather be white here than black. So I think the computer may be underestimating white's position when it gives it a slight edge there. Anyway, that's so that's with h6, bishop h4, but you don't have to play g5. You could just castle here or play d6. Probably d6 is the safest move to play here. Anyway, I castled here, and he played f4, and I almost played h6. If you're listening to the live video, I was thinking about playing h6, and I almost played it routinely. I'd been moving kind of fast up to this point, but f4 is definitely a move where I needed to stop and think, and I did manage to force myself to stop and think, and I defended with d6, so that when he takes the pawn, I mean, the basic threat of f4 is that he's going to take here with a double attack on my knights, queen attacking here, and the pawn attacking the pinned knight. So defending here makes logical sense and seems to be the best move. If I had played h6, by the way, yeah, this falls apart immediately. He takes here. Let's see. I can grab the bishop. He can grab the knight. I think it's best for him to take that one. I can try and save this knight, but then he can bring the queen out, and things are just falling apart for me. Once again, he has, let's see, in this case, no, I think the pawns are still even. It's 3 and 4, and I have 3 and 4. Yeah, it's even material, but white has active pieces and a good attack, and this is going to be a nasty pawn to deal with here. Anyway, yeah, so it's a good thing I didn't play h6. Chess Engine scores that as a complete win for white. So d6 was the way to play it. So he took, and I took back. as planned, and just seems there's no way to avoid this opening of the G file. So white did have to give up the bishop pair here. So first of all, I gave up the bishop pair to win a pawn. Then white gave up the bishop pair to damage my king side. But I think that's the correct way to play this gambit, and it's a little bit risky here. Queen h5, it's a good continuation. I was talking about queen g4, but of course my bishop is covering that square, so that was not possible. Let's see, and then I played knight takes c2. So knight takes c2, I can't really recommend this kind of move, just grabbing more material. It could get me in big trouble. Although, technically speaking, it turns out to be okay. I think bishop e6 would be a safer way to play this position. That's probably what I would recommend. And then, maybe he could bring his knight out to defend the bishop. And then king h8 was a suggestion of the chess engine. It makes sense. Maybe you can position this rook to the g file. You want to try and control as many files, as many of those squares around the king as possible to make it difficult. Notice the bishop here is controlling a lot of good squares. You want to make it difficult for white to get something going. And maybe you can double on the g file and get some counterplay against his king. So that's one way to play it. Another way to play it is to just play the move c6. And this idea will come up again later. The point is that it prevents the knight from going to c3 and then to d5. And that can be very important for defending. See, after c6, probably knight d2. If he were instead, and the attack continues here with, black is better, but white has attacking chances. Let's see. If he, instead of playing knight d2, played c3 to kick the knight away, at this point it's now safe to play this move. Go after the rook, and you've got this pawn on c3 holding off, hold c6 rather, defending these key squares. Mainly d5 is the key square it's defending. So anyway, those are a couple other ways to play this that would be safer than what I played. I think c6 was actually the engine's recommendation. But anyway, knight takes c2. And now actually here is his first blunder, first big mistake, which he played rook f3 at this point, a natural rook lift. But what he should do is he should exploit, try and take advantage of my failure to play c6 here. And he should play knight to c3 at this point. And this keeps white in the game. And in fact, if I play knight takes a1, and again, this shows how dangerous the attack can be. After knight to d5, attacking this pawn, king g7 to defend it. He can take here anyway. And the chess engine says I should sacrifice my queen at this point to survive. So this is a nice attacking position for white. I think I would be happy with this position for white. It's only the queen and the bishop, but is this knight ever going to get back into the game? And there's immediately going to be a rain of checks on the king here, and my pieces are not participating over here either. So very dangerous position for black, and I think the chess engine prefers white in that position. So knight c3, c6, keep that knight out of d5. He can play rook a to d1, hitting the queen, and I can bring the knight back to d4. And it seems like I can survive this position, but white still has an attack, and the game will continue for a while. So it's white's compensation is still there for the sacrifice, for the sacrificed pawn. At that point, he's even down. Let's go back to that position. He might be even down 2 pawns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, he's down 2 pawns, but he has compensation, and a pretty dangerous position for black. Although technically, with good play, black is probably still better. But anyway, he went rook f3, and after this, black should win. Although it's always easier for the computer to say this than for people to find it. But it's safe enough to take the rook at this point, because he's left his knight out of the game, and I control enough squares with my bishop and my queen and rook ready to come over, and my king to step aside, that I control enough of those squares that I should be okay here. And that's the one thing I can say for playing the way I did is sometimes you have to test your ability to calculate. Can you really foresee the attack that's coming and find all the moves that will defend? And if you can, you know, to the best of your ability to calculate, if it seems like you can defend, then you really should grab the material, and you will learn something either way. Either you defend correctly, or you will lose because of an oversight or a mistake you make later, and in any case you'll learn something. Anyway, he went with rook g3 check. It's if he could have doubled on the h3, it's pretty key that my bishop controls this square, and it's also key that he couldn't bring his rook up to this square and bring it over. So there was no quick doubling on the h file. That's one of the things that allows me to hold this position together. So I can just step to h8, and I'll have time to bring my rook over and up to defend. So he's getting increasingly desperate, I suppose. Tried bishop takes f7. I just lifted my queen up. I wanted to bring the bishop out to this square to counteract the bishop on this diagonal, and also connect my rooks and get something on the g file. That's my plan. He tried bishop back to d5, and I just went bishop e6 here, and he resigned. His attack is over, and you know, he's still not getting here. You know, he could try this. He could take, and then he could double. But now I have a couple of ways to defend the h pawn. I could also defend with the queen, and so I'm basically just a rook up at this point. So he decided, after I played bishop e6, yeah, this is the last move of the game, he decided to resign. Anyway, very interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed this commentary, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.